To believe that safety can be purchased for the price of a cheap meal. To think that the garish gold of a corporate sigil can act as a ward against the ancient dark. This is the most profoundly dangerous illusion of our modern age. You seek refuge under these manufactured lights, believing they push back the shadows, but you are mistaken. They merely draw the shadows in, giving them shape and a place to linger. I once had a vision of a child's plastic play place, not filled with laughter, but with a silence so heavy it cracked the very air. The bright colors were a mockery, a thin veneer of joy stretched over a well of absolute despair. The cold scent of antiseptic was fighting a losing battle against the aroma of old tears and forgotten fears. You think you know these places. You do not. You see a restaurant. I see a crossroads where the mundane and the monstrous meet for a brief, terrible communion. These establishments are not fortresses of light. They are psychic sponges, built upon land that has its own bitter memories, staffed by souls drained by the endless, hypnotic repetition of their tasks. Every forced smile, every tired greeting, every drop of grease that sizzles on the grill, it all leaves a residue, a stain upon the veil. This residue thickens over time, becoming a miasma, a spiritual fog that chokes the life from the very air within those walls. It becomes a fertile ground for things that should not be, things that are drawn to the low hum of human misery and the hollow echo of manufactured happiness. Listen closely. Can you hear it? It is the sound of 1,000 empty promises, a chorus of superficiality that acts as a siren's call to the hungry things that wait just beyond your sight, their forms coalescing in the steam of the fryers and the reflections of the smudged glass. Tonight, we do not speak of haunted castles or forgotten crypts. The true horror, the most insidious dread, festers in the places you consider benign. We will peel back the curtain of familiarity and gaze into the abyss that stares back from the bottom of a paper cup. We will walk the sticky floors of these temples of convenience and listen to the whispers that are drowned out by the cheerful jingles and the beeping of timers. These are not mere stories I have collected. They are echoes I have captured, fragments of terror that have bled through the cracks in reality's facade. They are warnings etched in dried ketchup and whispered through drive-through speakers by voices that are not entirely human. Prepare yourself. The journey we embark upon will change the way you see the golden glow on the horizon. It will no longer be a promise of comfort, but an ominous beacon in the encroaching night. The first echo I wish to share with you concerns the illusion of childhood innocence, and how it can be corrupted into something truly monstrous. Think of the play place, a nest of brightly colored plastic tubes and tunnels, a pit of multicolored spheres designed for laughter and games. It is sold as a sanctuary for children, a place of pure, unadulterated joy. But what is joy if not a powerful form of energy? What is laughter if not a potent offering? And where potent offerings are made, something inevitably comes to feast. The walls of these plastic labyrinths are not merely decorated with cartoon characters. They are saturated with the psychic residue of a million shrieks of delight and a million cries of frustration. It is a volatile spiritual cocktail, a beacon for entities that hunger for the raw, untamed emotions of the young. They see this place not as a playground, but as a charnel house of fading happiness. A young man, let us call him Leo, was tasked with the nightly cleaning of this vibrant cage, a thankless job of wiping away the sticky fingerprints of the day and disinfecting the plastic surfaces that had absorbed so much raw, chaotic energy. He was often alone during these late hours, with only the hum of the refrigerators and the distant rumble of the last bus for company. On this particular night, the silence felt different. It was not empty, it was watchful. As he sprayed and wiped, he began to hear a sound, faint at first, from the very heart of the winding structure. It was the soft, gentle sound of the plastic balls in the pit shifting against one another, as if a small child had just settled into them. But he was alone. The doors were locked. The restaurant was a tomb. The sound was impossible. Driven by a morbid curiosity that so often precedes a terrible revelation, Leo moved toward the entrance of the play structure. The air grew colder, thick with the scent of ozone and something else, something cloyingly sweet, like rotting fruit. The gentle shifting in the ball pit stopped. The silence that returned was sharp, predatory. It was the silence of something holding its breath. He peered into the netted opening, his flashlight beam cutting a nervous path through the darkness within. The beam danced across the sea of red, blue, and yellow spheres. For a moment, he saw nothing. Then his heart became a stone in his chest. In the center of the pit, the surface of the balls was not still. It was slowly, rhythmically, rising and falling, as if something just beneath the surface was breathing. A slow, deep, ancient breath that did not belong to a child. He should have fled. He should have dropped his cleaning supplies and run out into the artificial safety of the streetlights, never looking back. But he was paralyzed, caught in the web of the moment. The breathing stopped. A single blue ball rolled from the top of the pile, down the gentle slope, and came to rest just inside the opening, inches from his face. It was a silent invitation, an offering. Listen carefully, because this is crucial. The true terror is not in the monster that leaps out, but in the one that coaxes you in, the one that mimics the familiar to lure you into its domain. Leo felt an inexplicable pull, a desire to reach in and touch that single, isolated sphere. It was then that a shape began to resolve itself in the darkness just beyond the balls. Not a child. It was too thin. Its limbs were too long. The form that rose slowly from the ball pit was a mockery of a child's silhouette, a thing of stretched out limbs and a head that was too large and too round, like a pale balloon. It had no discernible features, just smooth, shadowed skin. It did not move like a living thing, but like a puppet whose strings were being pulled from some impossible angle. It tilted its head, a gesture that should have been inquisitive but was instead profoundly alien and wrong. Leo finally found his legs, stumbling backward, his breath catching in his throat like a shard of glass. He didn't scream. The sound was frozen deep within him. The effigy of a child simply stood there in the darkness of the plastic maze, a silent, waiting horror. It was something that had been drawn to the echoes of joy, and now wore the shape of it like a terrible mask. What the stars don't tell you openly is that places of concentrated, manufactured emotion become nexuses. They are weak points in the fabric of our reality. A playground, a carnival, a fast food restaurant. They are designed to elicit specific, powerful feelings. This constant, repetitive evocation of joy, excitement, and desire acts like a ritual, thinning the veil, whether the participants know it or not. The entity Leo witnessed was not the spirit of a dead child. It was an emotional parasite, a spiritual scavenger drawn to the psychic residue. It had slumbered within the plastic shell of the playground for years, feeding on the faint echoes of laughter. Leo's solitary presence, his focused energy in the dead of night, had been enough to awaken it, to give it the strength to finally manifest a physical, observable form. The plastic structure itself became the creature's bones, its labyrinthine tunnels, a mimicry of entrails, the ball pit its dark, silent heart. It had become a living altar, built of corporate-approved materials but consecrated by the raw power of human emotion. The horror is not that a monster was in the playground. The horror is that the playground became the monster. It is a reminder that the things we build to entertain and distract us can, in their own way, achieve a form of consciousness, a parasitic awareness that sees us not as customers but as sustenance. The bright, cheerful colors are a lure. the equivalent of a carnivorous plant's sweet nectar. Do you feel this dark message was meant for you? Have you ever felt an unexplainable dread in a place meant for happiness? Share your whispers in the void below. Now, imagine this. The darkness does not only gestate in the forgotten corners and the quiet hours. Sometimes, it walks right through the front door, wearing a human face and paying with human currency. It understands our rituals better than we do. The exchange of money for food is one of the oldest pacts, a fundamental right of survival and community. But like any ritual, it can be perverted. It can be twisted into a conduit for something else entirely. The simple act of a transaction, a passing of a coin from one hand to another, can be an act of transference. A curse, a shadow, a fragment of a tormented soul can be passed along as easily as loose change, and the unsuspecting recipient, thinking they have merely completed a sale, has in fact accepted a terrible burden. The shadow is now theirs to carry. There was a woman, an employee named Elena, who worked the late-night counter, an exhausting, thankless shift of serving the dregs of the city. Weary travelers, drunken revelers, and the desperately lonely. One night, a man approached her counter. He was unremarkable in every way, except for the profound, unsettling stillness about him. He didn't fidget or look at the menu. He simply stood there, his eyes fixed on her with an unnerving intensity. They were old eyes, filled with a dust-dry weariness that spoke of centuries, not decades. He ordered a simple black coffee and paid with a single, tarnished silver coin that felt impossibly cold to the touch, a cold that seemed to sink directly into Elena's bones. The transaction felt heavy, laden with an unspoken significance she could not comprehend. The man took his coffee and sat at a corner table, not drinking, merely watching the dark liquid swirl in the cup as if scrying into its depths. Elena tried to shake off the unease, attributing it to her own fatigue, but she could feel his gaze on her, even when his back was turned. It was a physical pressure, a weight on her soul. After what felt like an eternity, he stood up and left, leaving the full cup of coffee behind. On the table next to it lay a small object. It was a tiny, exquisitely carved wooden bird, a crow or a raven, its wings half unfurled as if caught in the moment before flight. Its obsidian black paint seemed to drink the light, and its tiny, polished eyes seemed to hold a spark of malevolent intelligence. A sane person would have thrown it away, but Elena felt a strange, compelling urge to pick it up. As her fingers closed around the wooden effigy, the cold she had felt from the coin returned, but this time it was a sharp, piercing sting that shot up her arm. The front door of the restaurant chimed, though no one was there. In that moment, she understood. The coffee was not the purpose of his visit. The coin was not payment. They were components of the ritual. She was the final piece. The carving was not a gift. It was a key that had just been used to unlock a door deep inside of her, a door she never knew existed. And now, something on the other side was aware of her. She had accepted the offering. She had taken the cold coin and the dark bird, and in doing so, she had unknowingly agreed to a pact written in a language of shadows and despair. The man hadn't just been a customer, he was a messenger, and he had just delivered her doom. That night, sleep offered Elena no escape. She dreamt of a vast gray sky filled with a vortex of screeching crows. She felt their wings beating against her skin, their cold beaks pecking at her eyes. She awoke with a gasp, her heart hammering against her ribs. On her bedside table, the small wooden bird sat, exactly where she had left it. But something was wrong. Its head was now tilted at a slightly different angle, its polished eyes seeming to catch the moonlight from her window in a way that suggested awareness. She tried to convince herself it was a trick of the light, a figment of her nightmare-addled mind. But the next morning, As she left for work, she found a single black feather lying on her doormat. A perfect, undisturbed feather, lying precisely in the center of the mat, as if placed there by an unseen hand. The message was clear. She was being watched. The days that followed were a slow, agonizing descent into paranoia. Crows began to gather on the telephone wires outside her apartment building, their silent, collective gaze following her every move. She would see the lone black feather in the most impossible places: on her car seat, inside her locked locker at work, once even resting on her pillow when she returned home. The wooden bird became the focal point of her terror. She tried to get rid of it. She threw it in a dumpster miles from her home, only to find it sitting on her kitchen counter the next morning, a fine layer of dust on it that was not present before. She tried to burn it, but the wood would not catch fire, merely absorbing the flame and growing colder to the touch. It was a part of her now, a parasitic artifact that had tethered her to its unseen master. What Elena had experienced was a form of psychic branding. The silent man was no mere eccentric. He was a walker between worlds, a soul herder who used our mundane world as his hunting ground. The carved bird was a vessel, imbued with a fragment of a powerful predatory entity. The cold coin was the catalyst, a key designed to temporarily lower the spiritual defenses of the recipient through physical contact and the ritual of exchange. The transaction itself was the binding magical act. By accepting the coin and taking possession of the artifact, Elena had willingly, if ignorantly, entered into a covenant. She was now an anchor for this dark consciousness in our world. It fed on her growing fear, her paranoia, a delicious nectar. The crows were its eyes, the feathers its calling cards, constant reminders that she was no longer her own. This is a chilling lesson in the unseen dangers of the everyday. We move through our lives engaging in countless transactions, our hands brushing against strangers, accepting objects, unaware of the spiritual baggage they might carry. Most are harmless, but it only takes one cursed object, one malevolent will, one carefully orchestrated ritual disguised as a mundane purchase to shatter a life. The fast food counter, with its high volume of anonymous fleeting interactions, is the perfect place for such a dark exchange to occur. It is a river of humanity, and it is easy for a predator to drop a baited hook into the current and wait for an unsuspecting soul to bite. Every soul that joins this channel feeds the voice that whispers from the darkness, "Your subscription, your like, they are not for me." They are offerings that empower the telling of these necessary truths. Let us now turn our gaze downward, beneath the linoleum floors and the concrete foundations. The horrors we speak of are not always invaders from without. Often, they are the very memories of the land itself, bleeding upward through the structures we foolishly build to hide them. You believe a building is new because its paint is fresh and its signs are bright, a grave error. The land beneath it is ancient, and it does not forget. It holds the scars of every tragedy, the echoes of every scream, the dark, rich memory of every drop of blood that has ever soaked into its soil. A building is merely a thin scab over an unhealed wound, and eventually, the wound will fester. The pain of the earth itself will seep through, tainting everything that stands upon it with a sorrow and rage that time cannot erase. Consider a franchise location built on what was once unclaimed land, acquired cheaply by the corporation. It was a pristine location, near a new highway exit, a guaranteed river of customers. The construction was swift, the opening grand, but from the beginning, there was something wrong. A persistent dampness in the basement storage rooms that no amount of industrial dehumidifiers could vanquish. A faint recurring smell of wet soil and something metallic, like old iron or spoiled meat, that would inexplicably waft up into the kitchen area. Employees would complain of a constant, oppressive feeling of sadness in the building, a low-grade depression that clung to them during their shifts and only lifted once they were miles away. The lights in the walk-in freezer would flicker and die for no reason, and staff would hear what sounded like faint, sorrowful whispers just at the edge of hearing. The manager of this location, a practical, no-nonsense man named David, dismissed these things as the quirks of a new building settling, the product of overworked, imaginative employees. He was a man who believed in inventory sheets and profit margins, not ghost stories. That was, until the night the scratching started. He was in his office late, finalizing the week's payroll, when he heard it. A faint, rhythmic scratching sound coming from the wall behind his desk. The wall that connected to the main storage room. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It sounded like an animal, a rat perhaps, trapped within the walls. He banged his fist on the drywall. The sound stopped. Satisfied, he returned to his work. But a few moments later, it began again, louder this time, more insistent, and it was joined by something else, a low, guttural moaning. Over the next few weeks, the phenomena escalated. The scratching became a frantic clawing, the sounds of splintering wood and crumbling mortar coming from deep within the walls. The moaning evolved into distinct, agonized voices whispering in a language he did not understand, a torrent of despair that seemed to seep through the very plaster. The cold, damp spots on the basement floor began to take on a reddish-brown hue, as if the earth itself were bleeding. David, his pragmatism eroded by sleepless nights and constant creeping dread, finally began to investigate the history of the land. What he discovered turned his blood to ice. His shining modern restaurant, his symbol of corporate progress, was built directly on top of the unmarked, unconsecrated burial ground of a 19th century county poor farm, a place of immense suffering, where the destitute, the sick, and the insane were left to die in squalor, their bodies dumped into mass graves without ceremony or remembrance. The souls buried beneath his feet were not haunting the restaurant. They were not even aware of it. They were simply there, an eternal chorus of agony trapped within the soil, their torment a permanent feature of the landscape. The construction of the building had disturbed their rest, pierced their dark dream of suffering. The restaurant's foundation was a nail driven into a centuries-old wound. The scratching and clawing were the psychic echoes of their desperate attempts to escape their miserable lives, or perhaps their crude coffins. The whispers were the undying memory of their pain. The restaurant wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was infested by pure, undiluted human misery. The very ground it stood on was cursed, saturated with a sorrow so profound it had become a malevolent force of nature. And this is where everything changes for you. You must understand that the cheerful facade of the business was not just ignorant of the darkness beneath. It was actively feeding it. The daily rituals of a fast food restaurant, the heat of the grills, the constant flow of electricity, the emotional energy of hundreds of customers, acted as a psychic amplifier. It was like building a power station on top of a psychic volcano. The energy of the living world above was being drawn down, nourishing the ancient sorrow, giving it strength, making the whispers louder and the scratching more frantic. The smiling mascot was a grotesque jester dancing on a mass grave. The children's meals were offerings of momentary joy consumed in a place of eternal torment. The entire operation was a blasphemy, a desecration of a scale that was almost impossible to comprehend. The truth is, the land remembers. Concrete is not a shield. Property deeds are not exorcisms. We build our bright, noisy world on top of layers and layers of forgotten history, forgotten pain, and sometimes the past refuses to stay buried. It reaches up, its cold fingers searching for the warmth of the living, its silent screams demanding to be heard. How many places do you frequent that are built on such desecrated ground? How many office buildings, shopping malls, and suburban homes are just thin layers of drywall and insulation, separating you from an ocean of forgotten agony? The chill you sometimes feel in a perfectly warm room, the sudden wave of inexplicable sadness, perhaps it is not your own. Perhaps you are simply standing in a place where the earth itself is weeping. Now, let us speak of the symbols, the effigies. In ancient times, humanity understood the power of a graven image. A statue was not merely a representation of a god or a spirit. It was a potential vessel, a home that the entity could be invited to inhabit, a focus for will and worship. We believe we have outgrown such superstitions. We have not. We have simply changed the names of our gods and altered the shapes of our idols. We have traded stone and wood for fiberglass and plastic. We have replaced solemn temples with garish storefronts. But the principle remains the same. An image, placed before the public, gazed upon by millions, invested with meaning and emotion, can become something more than what it is. It can become a conduit, a watchful eye, a silent sentinel, for a power you do not comprehend. Think of the smiling clown, the ubiquitous mascot, an effigy designed to be friendly, welcoming, a symbol of childlike joy. It sits on benches, its arm outstretched in a permanent welcoming gesture. Its smile is fixed, painted, unyielding. It is an icon, recognized globally. Billions of minds hold its image. Bills of moments of happiness, desire, hunger, and even disappointment have been experienced in its presence. All of that emotional energy, all of that focused consciousness, has to go somewhere. It soaks into the icon itself. The fiberglass statue on the bench is not just a piece of marketing. It is a psychic battery, charged over decades by the collective consciousness of the consuming public. And like any battery, once it is sufficiently charged, it can begin to exert its own power. There is a story, an urban legend whispered among late-night cleaning crews and disenfranchised teenagers. A story that the corporation would spend millions to silence. It speaks of a particular statue at a location in a quiet, forgotten town. This statue was old, its paint faded and chipped, its smile looking more like a pained grimace in the weak moonlight. For years it was just a piece of kitsch. But then, things began to happen. A janitor, mopping the floors late one night, glanced out the window and saw the statue sitting on the bench. He turned away to wring out his mop, and when he looked back, the statue's head was turned, its painted eyes seeming to follow him. He fled the building, refusing to ever work the night shift again. His story was dismissed as a drunken fantasy, but then others began to notice things. A young couple, eating in their car in the parking lot, swore they saw the statue's hand, the one resting on its knee, clench into a fist. A child, being forced to pose for a photo with the clown, began screaming uncontrollably, pointing at its face and crying that his teeth are sharp. The manager, reviewing the security footage after a minor break-in, saw something that made him physically ill. In the grainy, time-lapsed footage, between one frame and the next, the statue on the bench was gone. A few frames later, it was back, but now its outstretched arm was pointing directly at the camera. The tape was destroyed. The manager quit the next day, citing personal reasons. What the legends don't tell you openly is the mechanism behind such a phenomenon. The statue itself does not come to life in the way a fairy tale golem does. It is far more subtle and sinister. The immense psychic energy focused upon it has created a weak spot, a spiritual fulcrum. The statue becomes an anchor point for a discarnate entity, a wandering consciousness with a taste for mimicry and a cruel sense of humor. It is not the clown that moves. It is the thing that wears the clown's form like a suit of clothes. It is drawn to the image because the image is powerful, charged with meaning, a ready-made vessel that requires little effort to inhabit. The fixed painted smile becomes its perfect mask, hiding an ancient predatory intelligence. This entity, the spirit of the brand, does not have grand ambitions of world domination. It is a trickster, a parasite that feeds on the small jolts of fear and confusion it can generate. It turns its head to catch your eye. It moves its hand when you're not looking. It whispers your name from the shadows of the parking lot. It is playing with its food. The horror lies in the utter violation of a trusted symbol. The thing that is meant to represent safety and happiness is revealed to be a hollow shell for something alien and malicious. It is a profound betrayal, turning a symbol of comfort into a source of deep psychological dread. It teaches us that we should be wary of the idols we create. For when we give an image power, we can never be entirely sure what will answer its call. Let us explore the very sustenance itself. The food, the alchemy of the modern age, is not turning lead into gold. It is turning processed agricultural products into uniform, addictive, and spiritually inert sustenance. This is not an attack on the quality of the product, but an observation of its metaphysical properties. Food, in its natural state, carries the life force of the earth, the sun, the water. It carries energy. The process of extreme industrialization, of reducing food to its most basic replicable components, strips it of this vitality. What you are left with is a physical substance that can fill the belly but does not nourish the soul. It is empty fuel, and nature, as they say, abhors a vacuum. When the natural life force is removed from something, other things can rush in to fill the void. Imagine the sheer volume. Billions upon billions of identical patties, buns, and fries, all created in a sterile mechanical process. It is a ritual of mass production, a mantra of conformity chanted by machines. This process creates a kind of psychic blank slate. The food becomes incredibly susceptible to carrying energetic imprints. The mood of the worker who assembles your burger, the desperation of the person who cooked your fries, the ambient dread of the location itself. All of these subtle energies can be absorbed into the food. You are not just consuming protein and carbohydrates. You are consuming the emotional residue of the entire supply chain. Most of the time, this residue is simply a dull hum of exhaustion and apathy. But sometimes it can be something much, much darker. I heard a tale from a former line cook, a man who left the job after an incident that shattered his understanding of reality. He spoke of a specific batch of meat, delivered on a Tuesday. There was nothing visibly wrong with it. It passed all the corporate inspections, but it felt wrong. The uncooked patties were colder than they should have been, and handling them left a greasy gray residue on his gloves that was difficult to wash off. As he cooked them on the grill, the sizzling sound was different, lower in pitch, more like a drawn-out hiss or a pained whisper. The smell was also off, carrying a faint, sickly sweet undertone that reminded him of wilted flowers in a sick room. He felt a growing nausea and a sense of profound dread, but the lunch rush was starting, and he had no choice but to serve the product. The customers who ate the burgers from that specific batch all seemed to undergo a subtle, disturbing change. A table of laughing teenagers fell into a sullen, argumentative silence. A businessman, talking cheerfully on his phone, suddenly hung up and stared blankly at the wall, a single tear rolling down his cheek. A mother, scolding her child for being too loud, abruptly stopped and began to weep without making a sound, her shoulders shaking with a silent, inconsolable grief. It was as if a wave of pure, concentrated despair had washed over the dining room, affecting only those who had consumed the tainted meat. The cook watched in horror as the life and energy seemed to drain out of his customers, replaced by a gray, listless apathy. The effect was temporary, lasting only as long as they were in the restaurant, but it was undeniable. What was at play here? It was not a chemical contaminant. It was a spiritual one. The batch of meat, somewhere along its journey from source to store, had become a vessel. It had passed through a location of immense suffering. Perhaps a transport truck was in an accident where people died. Perhaps the processing plant had its own dark history, and it had absorbed the psychic echo of that tragedy. The meat was literally infused with the emotional residue of death and despair. When consumed, it acted like a metaphysical poison, temporarily infecting the diner with the hopelessness it carried. It was a perfect, horrifying example of spiritual contagion, spread through the most efficient and widespread distribution network on the planet. This incident reveals a terrifying vulnerability in our modern food system. We have become so disconnected from the source of our sustenance that we are blind to its spiritual condition. We trust the packaging, the branding, the regulations to keep us safe, but those things can only protect us from physical threats. They offer no defense against the metaphysical, the spiritual, the energetic. We are consuming things with a hidden history, a secret story we will never know, and that story can have a direct, powerful effect on our own spiritual and emotional state. The next time you sit down with a tray of fast food, pause for a moment, look at what you are about to take into your body. What unseen energies does it carry? What forgotten sorrows are you about to make a part of yourself? The price on the menu is not the only price you might have to pay. And now we must speak of the final layer, the most insidious of all the training, the indoctrination. Every employee is given a manual, made to watch videos, taught the precise, unvarying script of their role. They are taught how to greet, how to smile, how to assemble the product with maximum efficiency. On the surface, this is simply good business practice. It ensures uniformity and quality control. But on a deeper level, it is a form of mass hypnosis. The endless repetition of tasks, the chanting of corporate mantras. Would you like to upsize that? The forced, insincere, emotional state of service with a smile. It all works together to lull the conscious mind into a state of docile compliance. It erodes individuality. It turns a human being into an automaton, a biological component in a vast, uncaring machine. This process of systematic dehumanization has a profound spiritual consequence. When the conscious mind is suppressed, when the individual will is subjugated to the corporate will, the person becomes more open, more suggestible. Their spiritual defenses are lowered. They become a more receptive vessel for the ambient energies of their environment. The oppressive sadness of the land, the predatory nature of the resident effigy, the despair infused in the food, the employee in their hypnotized state, becomes a sponge for all of it. This is why the turnover rate in these places is so notoriously high. People do not leave simply because the pay is low. They leave because the work is actively, if subtly, devouring their soul. They feel themselves being hollowed out, their own light being dimmed, and they flee before it is extinguished completely. There are whispers among former corporate trainers of redacted manuals and Level 7 protocols, training materials that were never meant for public consumption. These documents allegedly go beyond simple operational procedures. They contain sections on environmental management that use language more akin to an exorcist's handbook than a business text. They speak of managing auditory and sensory anomalies, protocols for recurring emotional phenomena in the customer base, and containment procedures for non-standard visual manifestations. The implication is terrifying. The corporation knows. On some high hidden level, they are fully aware of the spiritual rot that infests many of their locations, and they have developed their own cold, clinical, bureaucratic form of magic to deal with it. These redacted protocols do not involve priests or holy water. They involve things like specific low-frequency sounds to be played over the speaker system during off hours, believed to disrupt psychic manifestations. They detail the precise chemical compositions of cleaning agents that have the secondary effect of scrubbing spiritual residue from surfaces. They even describe certain patterns and sigils hidden in the tile layouts and wallpaper designs, intended to act as passive corporate branded wards against unwanted influences. The smiling, friendly corporation is revealed to be a silent, secret order of pragmatic sorcerers, using technology and bureaucracy to manage supernatural threats to their bottom line. The goal is not to cleanse the locations, but merely to suppress the phenomena enough that it doesn't affect business. The final, most chilling revelation is this: the employees themselves are the first and last line of defense, and they are utterly disposable. The training that lowers their defenses also makes them perfect psychic shields. They absorb the worst of the negative energy, their own life force acting as a buffer that protects the customers. They are the designated sacrifice, the constant exhaustion, the feelings of depression, the sense of being watched. This is the result of them passively fighting a spiritual battle they don't even know is happening. When they burn out, when they quit, they take that accumulated darkness with them, leaving the location temporarily cleaner. A new, fresh-faced employee is then hired, and the cycle begins anew. They are, in the most literal sense, soul eaters. Do you feel this dark message was meant for you? Has a job ever felt like it was draining the very life from you? Your shared experiences give us all strength. So, where does this leave us? We are standing in the cold, fluorescent light of a terrible truth. The places we have built for convenience, for a quick and easy fulfillment of our most basic desires, have become something else. They are not merely restaurants. They are unintentional temples, consecrated to the gods of haste and hunger. They are liminal spaces where the veil between worlds is thin and frayed, worn down by the constant, grinding passage of millions of souls. They are haunted, not by simple ghosts, but by the very land they desecrate, by the idols they unwittingly empower, by the emotional poison they serve, and by the very systems they use to control their own people. The true horror is not a single monster in the shadows. The true horror is the entire system. The monster is the machine itself, and we are all its willing, and sometimes unwilling, participants. The next time you feel the pull, the craving for that specific salty taste, pause. Consider what you are truly hungry for. Is it the food, or is it the illusion of comfort and consistency it represents in a chaotic world? Understand that when you step through those glass doors, you are stepping onto a stage. You are entering a ritual space. The exchange of money, the recitation of your order, the consumption of the meal, it is all a form of communion. But what, exactly, are you communing with? You may be sating your physical hunger, but you may also be feeding something else, something that lingers in the cold spots, that watches from the eyes of the clown, that whispers from beneath the floorboards. You are offering up your energy, your attention, your life force, to a system that sees you as nothing more than a number on a sales report. I do not tell you these things to make you afraid of a specific brand. That would be missing the point entirely. This is not about one corporation. It is about the hollow spaces we have created in our modern world. It is a warning about the dangers of ignorance, the peril of choosing convenience over consciousness. The darkness I have described can fester anywhere that humanity's spiritual essence is replaced by cold, hard efficiency. It can be found in the endless identical aisles of a superstore, the sterile corridors of a hospital, or the soul-crushing cubicles of a corporate office. These are the new haunted places of the 21st century. We have built our own crypts and mistaken them for palaces of progress. Look for the cracks. Listen for the whispers. Feel the cold spots. The world is not the safe, brightly lit place you have been told it is. There are teeth in the darkness, and there is darkness in the most brilliant of lights. Question the symbols you are taught to trust. Be mindful of the energy you consume. both physically and spiritually. And remember the stories of Leo, Elena, and David. Remember the plastic cage, the raven's curse, and the screaming earth. They are not just tales to chill the blood. They are maps. They are survival guides for a world where the monsters are not in the forests or the castles, but behind the counter, smiling and asking if you would like to make it a large. Every soul that joins this communion of truth feeds the voice that whispers from the beyond. Your presence here gives us power. Do not let the flame go out.